Townhouses can often seem like the perfect middle ground between a fully detached property and an apartment condo. But the thing is, if you're not careful, what seems like the perfect house could end up being a disaster that costs you financially in the long term. I'm talking about things like constant, unforeseen repair bills that you didn't see coming, things like issues with your neighbors or neighborhood association, and things that are ultimately going to make it difficult for you to resell this property and get other buyers interested when it is time for you to move on to the next house. Now, the purpose of today's video is to let you know that if you come across a townhouse that seems too good to be true, the price is fantastic, it's in a perfect location, there's often a reason for that, and it's important to look into those reasons before it's too late and you end up in a property that you are trapped in. So today I'm going to go through 9 of the most common issues that I run into when I'm looking at townhomes, especially with first-time buyers, and what you can do to protect yourself and mitigate the risk of ending up in a situation where you're going to pay for it financially down the road. Now, item number 1 to look out for is if you come across a townhouse with a much lower than expected condominium or strata fee. A lot of the townhouses in Ottawa are freehold, but many of them also have a condominium fee to cover off on some of the common elements. Things like shared roofs, shared parking garages, parking lots, outdoor space around the complex, that sort of thing. And those common elements are maintained by the reserve fund, which is funded by the condo fees that people pay every month. Now, if those condo fees are low, that can seem like a really good thing because your monthly expenses are, of course, going to be a little bit cheaper. But if they're lower than other townhouses in the area, it may be a reason to become suspicious, because it could mean that the reserve fund is chronically underfunded. And the reason that can lead to issues is because of point number 2, which is special assessments. Special assessments are what can happen when the funds in the reserve are insufficient to cover off on the needs of maintaining the common elements. So for example, let's say that we discover a bunch of leaks in the roof in the condo complex. The condo reserve fund is going to have to pay to repair all of the roofs, but if that reserve is underfunded and the funds aren't available to do that, that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And that's going to come in the form of a special assessment, which is basically a levy to each of the residents to pay for their portion of the repair. Special assessments can range from anywhere from a couple $100s to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the magnitude of the expense. And this is something you really have to look out for in advance. And more often than not, you're going to run into this issue when you're in a property that has a lower condo fee. Because if the condo fees are higher, the reserve fund is better funded and they're better able to absorb these unexpected expenses. Now, the way to protect yourself against both of these points is to get a copy of the condominium documents in advance. You can put it as a condition in your offer, your agreement of purchase and sale, which you absolutely should do. You should look over them carefully yourself, and you should enlist the help of a lawyer to look them over as well, because they are experts at reading these sorts of documents. And they can let you know if the reserve fund looks good or if there's anything else in there that can be an issue. Item number 3 is pet restrictions. Now, a lot of people assume just because it's a townhouse condo that any pet is going to be allowed. You can bring your 60-pound golden retriever with you if you want, but that's not always the case. A lot of condos, including some townhouse condos, have pet restrictions, which don't usually outright ban pets. You can usually have a cat or a smaller dog, but there are a lot of restrictions on the type and the size of the pet you can have. For example, 20 or 30 pounds for a dog. Now, a lot of the time they won't do anything about this unless somebody complains, but the fact that there's a condo rule stating that you're not allowed to have a dog over a certain size will be a concern for a lot of people who do potentially have pets. Could be a concern for you too. This is something else that you can look at in advance through the condo documents or status certificate. Item number 4 is playgrounds. Now, having a playground nearby or on the condo complex can be something that's really appealing if you are a young family. But if you're not, kids are, of course, a little bit noisy, and this is something that can drive potential buyers away down the road. It's also something that if the playground is actually on the condo complex, the condo fees are responsible for maintaining, and this can result in higher condo fees. Item number 5 is one of my favorites, and it's something that is often overlooked, I find, and that's visitor parking. Many condo complexes have a dedicated space for visitor parking, but it's not nearly enough to accommodate the number of houses that are there. So depending on the number of parking spots that come with the unit, oftentimes it's only one. You want to make sure that there's enough visitor parking around to make it practical for people to visit. And if you have a second car, to make sure there's somewhere available for that person to park. I have heard of people moving in and not realizing until after they've closed that there's no good spot for them to put their second car. and it really does affect their lifestyle over time. Poor visitor parking, like everything else, can also affect resale, so it's something you want to keep an eye on and make sure you know in advance exactly which parking spot is yours, where it's located, if there's an option to rent any more parking, or perhaps buy another parking spot down the road. Item number 6 is parking garages. Now, parking garages are a great feature to have, especially in Canada. It can keep the snow off your car, which there's a ton of value in that. But especially at the older complexes where they may be starting to deteriorate and they might not be as well designed as the more modern parking garages, you can run into a situation where you can get special assessments from the parking garage, or it's badly designed enough that it doesn't fit a lot of the newer, more modern cars, like bigger SUVs, that sort of thing. I have encountered situations like that. So that's something you want to check on in advance to make sure the parking garage is in good repair and that it can accommodate whatever vehicle you own or whatever vehicle you want to own in the future. Now, the first several points have focused a lot on condo townhouses, but this one applies equally to freehold townhouses, and that is poor soundproofing. This is something that can be difficult to test, but it's something you'd want to look at during the inspection or test any way that you can. Because if the soundproofing between the units isn't good, especially if you've got units above you or below you, if you're in a stacked unit or behind you, you can end up in a situation where you hear your neighbors all the time. And if they have pets or young children, that's something that can really become an issue. I know people who have moved just because the neighbors are too loud, and it's something that can affect resale too if people are screaming or playing music while there's showings happening in the property. This is something you want to make sure you look at in advance as best as you can. There's nothing you can do to 100% protect yourself from this. You can't control which people are going to move into which house, but it is something to be aware of. Another thing that's really important to consider is the layout of the townhouse and whether or not it's going to work for a lot of people. It's not just about the square footage. You also got to pay attention to how the space feels, how it flows. I've seen places that have tons of square footage, but like a really awkward, inaccessible kitchen tucked away in the corner that doesn't make any sense. Wasted floor space, just awkward corners that don't really make the place feel good. And that's something that, while it can work for a while, you will probably get tired of, and it will also affect the resale down the road. You want to make sure you have a floor plan that works for as many lifestyles as possible. That's why I always encourage people, if they can, to buy a 3-bedroom townhouse rather than a 2-bedroom, because it suits so many more lifestyles. Always check this in advance, pay attention to how it feels, get a copy of the floor plan if you can. The last thing to keep in mind, and this applies to both condo townhouses and freehold townhouses, is extra expenses. Now, for freeholds, these extra expenses are going to encompass pretty much everything. All of the utility costs, which are often underestimated. You can ask the sellers for a copy of their most recent utility bills over the last year or so to give you an idea of what costs are going to be like, although it is dependent on the number of people living in the home. The other thing you're going to need to budget for a freehold is things like the exterior of the building. So the windows, the doors, foundation if anything comes to that, if there's any water getting into the house, roof, all stuff that, well, it's not part of your regular monthly expenses, you do have to plan for in advance. And while condo townhouses are less at risk for this because a lot of these bigger ticket items are covered under the condo fee, you do still often have to pay most of your utilities, and there are things within the unit that are still usually your responsibility. Take a close look at the status documents that I mentioned before and make sure that you're putting enough money aside to cover off on these extra expenses if and when they do come up. Townhouses, both freehold and condo, can be a fantastic option, and they are a great starter home for most people. You just want to make sure you're doing your due diligence in advance so you don't end up in a place where you're going to have to overpay for repairs or be in a situation where it's going to be really tough to resell the place down the road when you look to move up. If you found this video helpful, you'll definitely want to check out my first-time homebuyers guide, which will walk you through step-by-step the process of buying a home in Ottawa, whether you're buying a townhouse or something else. If you found this content valuable at all, please consider liking and subscribing so it finds its way to more people like yourself. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and have a fantastic day.